Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is part 2 of the latest edition of Fresh Red Kills. So Fresh Red Kills is where I talk about the books that I have recently finished. Part 1 of this video dealt with some history books, one on Gothic history and 2 on ancient history, and now I'm looking at something more different. More different, of course. More recent is what I meant to say. And both actually pertaining to, I'm recording this in February right now, which is in the United States Black History Month. And I think both of those would qualify, although both written by white men. So I read Black Like Me by John Howard Griffin and The Soccer War by, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Ryszard Kapuscinski. That's what I'm going with. I hope I'm not butchering it. So first, let's talk about Black Like Me. I remember hearing about this back in high school. And I was fascinated by the story. John Howard Griffin, a white journalist who purposely took a certain medication and then laid beneath a UV light in order to darken his skin, and then traveled through the Deep South in 1959 in order to experience segregation firsthand. And of course, writing his journalistic, I guess, memoir almost. It's very novelistic in a way, and I'll talk about that. His account, Black Like Me, which came out, I think 1960, maybe when this came out. And at the time also, I was told the misconception that most people, I guess, had, maybe still have, that that medication that he took gave him skin cancer. And that's what ended up killing him. And at least in my teenage brain, when I heard that, I thought that he basically died shortly right after this was published. And that's actually not true. I think he ended up dying with complications of maybe diabetes or something like that. And it was almost 20 years later, around 20 years later. So, no, the medication did not kill him. But that was the misconception that I had up until the point where I started picking this up and reading more about it. But the other essentials are true. Griffin did take a medication, laid under UV light to darken his skin, and then tried to pass as African American in the Deep South in 1959. And what we have here is something very interesting. I mentioned that it's very novelistic. It's very readable, almost compulsively readable. And it's kind of novelistic nonfiction. And it's, in the way that we would get from somebody like Truman Capote, a few years after this, in the mid-1960s. So this predates that. This makes it very readable, a very fun read. Although at the same time, novelistic in the way that you have to sometimes feel like you need to take some of what he's saying with a grain of salt. He will recount long conversations when he did not have any kind of recorder going. So you definitely get the impression that he is fitting his recollections in order to prove a point. And it's not always clear exactly what you can trust with that. And I will say also that you can't help but feel a certain naivete when it comes to Griffin, who was, I think, a very intelligent man. But he darkens his skin and he automatically starts talking as though he is African American, as though, he is fully within African American culture now. And again, it comes off as kind of naive. The fact that he only did this for about 8 weeks, and it feels more like he's really a tourist in their world. He did not share a lifetime of oppression and segregation with the people that he's, claiming to basically be one of now. So those parts can get a little bit eye-rolling at times. But at the same time, there's some really interesting stuff in here. His experiences are certainly worth reading. And I can see how this would have been very, very powerful in the early 1960s. At the, as the civil rights movement was really coming into full swing. And I can see why, a lot of whites would have felt like maybe they had to read this from a white perspective. It's unfortunately true, that, African Americans, especially in the South, had learned a long time ago that if a white person doesn't, if they're told something they don't want to hear, they don't like hearing, it can be very dangerous for that person. So, there's that. You might not get the whole truth, and also you might have whites, even if they're sympathetic to Black Americans, not really believing what they might be reading. So I can understand why, coming from a white man, this stuff would be very persuasive. Even if today, we're so much about own voices and, letting people tell their own stories, it comes off, I guess, as, it could come off as much more condescending in a way to have a white man try and talk about what it's like to be Black. On the surface, that is ridiculous. But nonetheless, this is still a very interesting book. And I can see, again, why it was so powerful back then. It was certainly fun to still read today. So with those sort of qualifications, right, Black Like Me is still a really interesting book, and I'm glad that I read it. The other thing that I read, something that I had sitting on my TBR for a long time, and again, that's Kapuscinski's The Soccer War, which I believe was originally, it was written in Polish, and I think it was originally released 1978. I'm not sure when the English translation came out, but I think it was published in Polish in 1978. And Kapuscinski, he was a journalist for the Polish press, and known for really, going around the world and putting himself, especially in this situation, into real harm's way. Now, I know about, at least a little bit about the Soccer War and the conflict that happened between El Salvador and Honduras that was set off by a soccer match. So the soccer match wasn't the actual cause of the war. It kind of, made things boil over and finally get violent, something that had already been building. I'd assumed that this book was about that. It turns out it's only 30 pages of the book is about that. Most of the book is actually about Africa. And he's looking at basically military turmoil, revolutions, war in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. But the majority of the book does take place in different African countries. So they're more like little short stories or vignettes as you go through. And he goes to places like the Congo and Ghana. He goes to Algeria. And this does give him some experimentation. Sometimes he writes different sections of the book in different ways, and which can be very, very creative. One section is just definitions, or not definitions, but he'll talk about just a word and give a whole association with it. Like he talks about silence, and he has several paragraphs just talking about oppression in totalitarian governments and how they control silence, or the word Black, and he'll relate it to kind of like an anti-white religious revival in the Congo earlier in the 20th century. And, he talks about several near-death experiences that he has where he's got guns to his head and, nearly left in prison to rot, many of the close calls that he has in there. Some sections are a little more humorous. I will say that I think the most compelling section, though, was actually on the Soccer War. That was just very well written, that whole section. And there's several scenes that really stood out to me. At one point, they come to they're on the border with Honduras and El Salvador, and they come to basically a field in this village, and there's people being treated there with wounds, and there's just this soldier dying. They don't even know if he's from El Salvador. They don't know if he's Honduran. They don't know exactly who he is, but he's young. He's been shot like 11 times. And they're just kind of all standing around, with sadness, but also curiosity to see how long this person will just last. They can't believe he's still breathing at that point. He's also talking with a soldier at one point, a Honduran soldier, who's kind of leading him towards the back of the lines. And as they're passing a bunch of soldiers, that soldier that he's with is just astounded by the amount of boots that he's seeing, because his whole family at home is barefoot. And he just can't get over the fact that everybody's wearing shoes. So scenes like that will, I think, really stick out to the reader. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. And will say one of the reasons that I finally picked it up is because I'm participating in the Reading Africa 2022 challenge, which, as the day that I'm filming this, is the final between Egypt and Senegal. And when I realized very late in the game, I was kind of just going through books, and I realized that most of this book is actually Africa, and the title has to do with soccer. I thought that this would actually be a really good one to read before that tournament was over. So that's my reason for picking it up and finally going through it. But yeah, I would recommend both these works. John Howard Griffin, Black Like Me, of course, except in the fact that this is a white person trying to tell you what it's like to be black. If you can get over that fact, I think that, and look at it within the context of the time, it's still very good. And also the soccer war, dealing with conflict from really the 1960s is what he's talking about, originally published in 1978, but very terrific recollections from a very talented Polish journalist. So yeah, those are these two for the second part of Fresh Red Kills. And as always, if you got to the end, thank you, BookTube.